Hello, and welcome to another instructional design journey video. Today, I want to talk about portfolios. A lot of people, especially educators who are looking to move into instructional design roles, wonder if they need a portfolio. There isn't a yes or no to this because it depends a great deal on the types of jobs you are looking for and your experience. That being said, it can't hurt to have a portfolio to show you are a working designer and learner. Well, unless you have a bad portfolio. So let's talk a little bit about what I did to convert an initial portfolio focused a little bit more on education into instructional design. Now, you'll see that I built my initial portfolio in Google Sites, and I actually revised it in the same site. I just copied and saved my old one. I have in the past used WordPress, not the pay for site, and I may eventually pay for a site, but this is just to give you an idea of where I started. So I originally pulled my description from my LinkedIn page and then developed my sub pages to focus on my education, experience, and evidence. So this was a little bit more like an interactive resume versus maybe a strict portfolio. I did use a theme and colors within Google Sites that I thought complemented my LinkedIn profile picture well. And I also linked my LinkedIn page and added a contact button for in email. So it was basic and functional, but maybe didn't have a whole lot of design going on for it, especially since I had a lot of just stock photos that I was using at this point. To talk about my initial portfolio, I want to talk a little bit more about my evidence page, as I call it, because the education experience pages were pretty basic. They're what you think, my education and work experience. Although I did focus a lot on my education page about adding my continuing education, so how I was upskilling. But I think there's better ways to show that on your resume or just to have that on your LinkedIn page itself. So my initial evidence page is only shown in part because I linked to about 9 different projects. I put that in quotation marks, but some of them were more related to my freelance work as a writer and editor, which didn't fit in as well with my current projects and skill sets that I was developing. So I decided instead just to, on this screenshot, to show you the first two. So the first one is MLA Basics, which I'll show you how I revised that. So I thought that was a good place to start because I had developed a lot of material to go with that I changed over time. And there was a Rise course I played with. Um, where I tried to take a self-paced creative writing course that I'd kind of developed. Um, so it didn't fit in as well, so it didn't make it into my final portfolio, but it was really good for me to actually play with Rise, so that's why I wanted to mention it here, even if it didn't ultimately make it into my final portfolio. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about this MLA Basics page that I had. So prior to starting my work in the authoring tools such as Storyline, I took my MLA Basics page and went through my development of MLA materials for first year writing students, since that is something I taught quite a bit. So on this page, I described how I initially used MLA for in-person instruction, but then I went through to explain how I created some open resource materials for other instructors with a Prezi and a Google slideshow. And I also gave examples of how I'd actually taught the material in person as well as virtually, and how you could also use the materials I developed as asynchronous guides for students. And as I said, these were also made available to other instructors who did advise me they were used. So that was really exciting. I also included a video of myself presenting one of these lessons, along with a link to a discussion board assignment and rubric related to these materials. So I really wanted to cover all of the elements of designing a learning experience. So I had my analysis in there, my design, my development, how I implemented it, how I evaluated it. I showed a survey that I had given out to students and discussed my follow up with other instructors who had used my materials. That being said, it still was not developed in e-learning if that's something I wanted to get into. Um, in one of the authoring tools. So it was very much still more geared towards higher education. So at the end of this, once I got into the learning tools, I was able to show that I had developed a storyline version of this material that students could use to practice, to learn, practice, and quiz themselves. So I was able to take what I'd done as an educator in higher education and show how I could take that to the next step. Because even though MLA is a tool for education for the most part, being able to cite your sources and give credit is still a really good tool to have and for students to be able to show or other adult learners. Now I'm moving on to the revised version of my portfolio. I wanted to go with more of a simple, clean look. So I changed my hero area, as it's called, to include a picture that I created in Canva, along with a more focused mission statement for myself, which really looked at the fact that I love to help people tell their stories because we learn through stories. So I'm making the connection between my different worlds as a writer, as an editor, as an educator, and as somebody who wants to develop learning experiences. I also continue to include links to my contact and LinkedIn and developed what I now called my content page as a new way of labeling. My footer also contained contact and LinkedIn information as well as an icon that I had made. Now, some of this may still be in flux as I decide on kind of what brand colors, if you want to call it that, I want to have. But for now, I feel like this is a good look for what I'm trying to accomplish. The icon was actually created in PowerPoint by editing an SVG to make it my own. I also included it on my page as an animated GIF. I will probably change that in the future if I have more recommendations or other companies that I work with. So, as I always say with a portfolio, it's a work in progress. So, right now, I have my one endorsement on here. So, that's what I wanted to focus on for my landing page. Now, when you click on My Content, you will find three different projects, and one I have listed as coming soon to highlight some different skills, such as my storyline project that I worked on with a colleague who is also my SME, as well as the MLA basics that I previously mentioned, which had been revised. And further down, I have a software simulation that I really like, which also showed that I have used Articulate Rise, as I mentioned before. So now I had a little bit of a change and could still show that I had used Rise to some extent, even though the actual software simulation was built in Storyline. So that was kind of fun. And I was surprised myself at how much I enjoyed working on that. Here, you can then click to learn about my development process or read about the project itself, and with a brief overview as well as what my responsibilities were for each project and the kind of tools I used. And then you can click through and try the actual project. Now, I'm continuing to focus on the MLA Basics page because I think, especially for people who are transitioning into the career from another area, is being able to take some work that you've done and be able to translate that into instructional design words and actual experiences. So, with this page, I wanted to show how I could change that development process and go from something that's strictly more, say, higher education focused into something that could be used by a wider audience. So it's really good to still go through here and show my analysis of why I did this project. Why I continued developing. I go through my process. I actually include links to the OER materials that I previously kind of featured on my original portfolio. So now they're included in kind of that middle section there under process. And then down below with results and takeaways, I can continue to expand a little bit and say why I developed this new material and how instructors have told me they're being able to use this. And you can then link to the new project. Um, so while my old portfolio talked about process, it was more focused on the classroom development. So this focused more on e-learning development. So I think this can be a really strong tool for you to show how I could take an old project and make it new. To close this out, I wanted to give you a few more tips. So, as you're working on your instructional design portfolio, review portfolio examples in your industry of interest. Practice on a free website builder like Google Sites or WordPress. You may even be able to just have them on those sites. That's currently where I still am on my Google Sites. I am debating going through a pay site where I could maybe have a little bit more creative control, but I'm not quite there yet. Are there good alternatives for you with like an interactive PDF? Could you do something in a Prezi? Or there's lots of other things you could think about. So don't feel like you're limiting yourself to just doing a website. I do think you should keep it simple because less is definitely more. Your website is not going to be looked at for a long time. You just really want to get the highlights. Considering a working document that you curate over time. So, like, I'm working on a case study right now for a project I actually did at work, and I'd like to add that in. I don't want to bog down my portfolio and have lots of projects. So, I'll have to do some thoughts about how I want to organize that once I finish. It's also good to share your portfolio out there and get feedback on your content and design. I'd always love to hear from you if you have some tips for me or other things I could add or other videos I could make. So I'd love to hear from you. I'll have my contact information on the last slide as well as in the description area. So let's connect and good luck on your endeavors on getting your portfolio online.